Greetings and welcome to another lecture in Introductory Psychology. This one is in the anatomy of the ear. Now the odds are you've already been through this in health class, in biology class, or wherever. I think we went through it 3 or 4 times before I hit college. If you haven't, then you may want to find yourself a diagram. They're not difficult to find, of the anatomy of the ear, because what I'm mostly going to do here is I'm going to describe the parts, but I'm also going to be giving you their official Latin names, which if you happen to be going into medicine of any kind, you're probably going to need to know. So I don't have a diagram. You might want to pause this and go and find your own, because we're going to have a tour through the ear in Latin. Don't worry, you won't have to conjugate verbs. Now, following the path of sound. Sound is coming through the air. The waves are coming through the air. The first part of the body that they encounter is the outer ear, the external ear. Now, the external ear is technically called a pinna. And the pinna, of course, is what we as humans like to pierce and hang earrings from, and it holds up our glasses and such. It's the external ear. Different animals have different sized pinna. Some have big pinna, some have small pinna, some have pointed pinna, some have dangly pinna. Some don't have any pinna at all. A lot of birds, for instance, pretty much have no pinna. A lot of marine mammals don't as well. Dolphins, for instance, have no external ear. They just have a tiny little hole, which is the ear canal, which I'll be talking about in a minute. Now, what the pinna does is it collects sound waves and it funnels them down into the ear. So all of the various sizes and shapes and such that we have for the ear, they're all involved in funneling down sounds. Although ears can sometimes do other things as well. For instance, I've heard it said that bloodhounds have those long dangly ears in part because they help stir up the scent. But at any rate, for the most part, pinnas collect sounds. And they focus that sound through what's called the external auditory meatus into what's called the ear canal. So the ear canal, the external auditory meatus, basically is the place into which you are not to stick a Q-tip. A small note here. Earwax is actually good for you. Earwax protects the very delicate inside of the ear. It also has both antibacterial and antifungal properties. It's pretty amazing stuff. You should not stick a Q-tip into your ear to clean it, much less any other pointed sort of thing, unless you're a doctor and well-trained. And then you shouldn't do it on yourself. Because it is quite possible that by using a Q-tip to try to remove wax, you will actually succeed in shoving it further down into the ear canal, where it can become impacted and can affect your hearing. The best way to deal with wax is either to go to a professional or to use some sort of heavy-duty peroxide solution like the type that you buy in the little bottles with the large rubber bulbs, and use that large rubber bulb then to rinse out your ear after the wax has been loosened by the peroxide solution. Simply using hot water, by the way, will not do it because the water is not sufficient to liquefy the wax. It will, however, make it very difficult to be picked up by the aforementioned Q-tip. But yeah, please don't. They tell you to not stick anything smaller than your elbow in your ear, and they have a point. Now, the sound then is funneled from the pinna through the external auditory meatus in the ear canal onto what we tend to call the eardrum, but is officially called the tympanic membrane. Now, the tympany, of course, is a type of drum, so we have eardrum. Now, from the pinna through the external auditory meatus and the external ear canal to the eardrum is all called the outer ear. Now, what the tympanic membrane does is it takes those sound waves that have been funneled into the ear and it transfers them into mechanical motion. The tympanic membrane itself vibrates with those sound waves. That's what it does. It vibrates. And connected to the tympanic membrane in the middle ear are 3 tiny little bones that are collectively called the ossicles, which I believe means small bones. Now, you probably learned these bones as the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, but the technical Latin terms for those are the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, which, from what I understand, is Latin for hammer, anvil, and stirrup. The hammer is connected on one side to the eardrum, and on the other side it sort of is connected to the anvil, like a hammer would bang on an anvil if you're making a horseshoe or something. And the stapes is actually shaped like a little tiny stirrup. It looks like a little tiny stirrup in there. Now, all three of those bones are in the middle ear. And the middle ear itself is a little air bubble. It should be completely clear around those bones to allow them to move freely. Now, that little air bubble inside your head, you will have noticed if you've ever gone up in an airplane or up in a very tall building or went fairly far below the surface of the water. Because that little area is connected to the outside world through what is called the Eustachian tube. Now, the Eustachian tube, for the most part, is closed because it connects that middle ear to the back of your throat, and you generally don't want that open. You don't want nasty stuff, getting shoved up into your ear. But when you go up in a plane or you go down under the water, what happens is that tube is closed. But when you go underwater, all of a sudden there is more pressure on your body. And it pushes in your tympanic membrane, the pressure on the outside. On the other hand, if you go up in an airplane, the same thing happens in reverse. There's less pressure on the outside, and that little air bubble starts to expand and push against all those very sensitive tissues, including the eardrum. Either way, it's probably going to hurt. It's also probably going to make everything start to sound like this. If you've ever gone up in an airplane, you may have noticed that when things start to sound like this, and you yawn, or you chew gum, or you swallow, all of a sudden, and then it sounds like this. What you're doing then as you yawn or chew or whatever is you're opening up that Eustachian tube enough to equalize the pressure. And then, of course, as the plane lands or as you come back up from the deeper water, you're going to have to do it again in reverse. Now, Eustachian tubes can sometimes be trouble as well. If you've ever had a really clogged nose and you just were like, I'm going to blow my nose, and you took a deep breath and you got that, and you blew as hard as you could, sometimes have you noticed that you don't necessarily blow anything out your nose, but you hear a pop? What's happened there is you have opened your Eustachian tubes and you have hopefully only blown air up into that middle ear space. It's possible, however, that you may also have blown mucus, which probably means that you're going to have a lovely ear infection up there in the middle ear. And anytime you have any kind of gunk in that middle ear, whether it's from a sort of a self-inflicted ear infection or just a regular ear infection, you're going to affect hearing because the mucus is going to prevent those ossicles from moving freely. And again, you're going to wind up with some hearing problems. I'm going to talk about the different types of deafness in another recording. And that's why middle ear infections sometimes can cause people to not be able to hear very well for a while. Now, children often get middle ear infections, and the way they used to be treated was with antibiotics. The problem, of course, being that a lot of ear infections are not bacterial in origin, they are viral. And antibiotics don't do a damn thing for viruses. What more and more doctors are doing actually is, instead of treating the middle ear infection with an antibiotic or whatever, what they do is they drain the gunk out of the ear, often by putting a little tube in the ear. You put a little tube in the eardrum through that tympanic membrane. If the tube is small enough, it's not going to affect hearing, and eventually it'll either fall out or be removed, and the tympanic membrane will heal without much of a problem. But once you get all that gunk out of the middle ear and air can get in, it can allow that middle ear infection to clear up faster. It's the same thing about, draining pus out of a wound. It'll cause it to heal up faster because now you don't have all that gunk there looking for someplace to go. By the way, if middle ear infections get really bad and they aren't drained, it's possible that they could drain themselves by causing the eardrum to explode, which is not really something that you want to do. That is very likely to affect hearing. At any rate, so we have these ossicles. The malleus moves the incus, moves the stapes, and the stapes itself butts up against a structure called the cochlea. Now, the cochlea is the inner ear. We have the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. And the cochlea is where the actual hearing receptors are located. The hearing receptors are actually little hair cells inside the cochlea. They're in a tube that is filled with fluid, and when the stapes pushes against the outside of the cochlea, it sends waves down this tube. And as a wave goes past in this fluid, the hairs in the cochlea behave much the same way tall grass does when the wind blows. They lay down. The wave passes, they stand back up. Whenever those hair cells lay down, they send a signal. And it's from all of those signals, from all of those air waves, all of those sound waves that are transferred into physical energy by the tympanic membrane and transmitted by the ossicles to the cochlea that allows us to hear. Now, the cochlea is also involved in balance. There's a structure attached to the cochlea called the semicircular canals that basically help tell us which way is up and also tell us if we're moving or not. Which is why sometimes when you have an inner ear infection, you get dizzy. Because an inner ear infection can not only affect your hearing, it can also affect those semicircular canals and can affect your sense of balance. So here we are, following the sound. Pinna gathers the sound, puts it into the external auditory meatus and into the ear canal, where it runs into the tympanic membrane, causes the tympanic membrane to vibrate, which then transfers the vibrations to those three ossicles in the middle ear, the malleus, incus, and stapes, and the stapes then eventually transmits those vibrations to the cochlea, which is the inner ear where the actual hearing receptors, the hair cells, are located.